Want to welcome 3rd Congressional District Representative Ben Ray Lujan. And for the first time since I think you've been in the studio, we get to refer to you as the House Assistant Speaker. So welcome, Ben Ray. Appreciate your time today. Always a busy time, always nice to get you in here to get caught up on the things you're doing in Washington for us folks here in New Mexico. Wanted to start with a vote this week on the Dreamers Act, the new version of the Dreamers Act. And you were a sponsor of that bill. Can you talk a little bit about what that was designed to do, given what's happened with DACA and protection for Dreamers over the last year to 18 months?
Absolutely. Well, one, thanks to PBS for all the work that you do day in and day out to keep the community informed, and especially the importance of making news available in our communities. This was one of our proud weeks in Washington, D.C. since I've been in the Congress, to be able to work with our Democratic colleagues and to pass the DREAM Act and the Promise Act as we brought them together, which were needed because President Donald Trump took executive action to overturn the work that was put in place by President Barack Obama to provide certainty to dreamers across New Mexico. So this piece of legislation will, when passed, I should say, by Mitch McConnell in the Senate and signed into law by the President, which is work that we still need to get done, and want to encourage everyone to make sure that they're continuing to reach out to their senators to talk about this. But it'll provide the certainty necessary to address the chaos that was created by the Trump administration, a path to citizenship, bringing people out of the shadows. Again, young people who know no other place as home except for the United States of America. There are teachers, they serve in the military, they are in the hospital making sure that we get the care that we need, starting small businesses. This is an important piece of legislation that almost 18,000 eligible undocumented people in New Mexico will qualify for. And again, understanding the positive economic impact that this legislation will have as well to make a difference in our communities when signed into law by the President. So I'm hopeful Mitch McConnell will take it up and the President will sign it into law.
And a reminder for the folks watching, this is specifically designed to accommodate children who were brought here not of their own accord, maybe by undocumented parents, and so making sure that they have the protections that DACA once provided. Right?
Absolutely. So this codifies and goes beyond even the executive orders that were put in place by President Barack Obama into the Deferred Action on Children, that otherwise known as DACA. But again, an important piece of legislation, and to be able to work with the advocates across the country, including leaders in the community from New Mexico that work to get the votes necessary to pass this out of the U.S. House of Representatives.
You mentioned you got work to do. I actually read a quote this morning from Senate Majority Leader McConnell that said that he doesn't think there's a good chance for this to come to a vote there, that he's not too inclined right now to even bring it up for a vote. So what is that work that you're gonna do to try to change his mind on that?
Well, sadly, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the highest ranking Republican in the U.S. Senate, has deemed himself, dubbed himself, the Grim Reaper of legislation coming out of the House of Representatives, even though it has overwhelming majorities, like the DREAM Act, of support from people across America. So again, we're going to continue to bring attention to the benefits associated with passing the DREAM and Promise Act. I'm hoping that people across Kentucky will make sure his office understands the magnitude of the positive economic benefits and the certainty to these young people across America that we should be putting these protections and certainty in place for as well. So again, one person at a time, one state at a time, all across America will culminate in more public support, which is already at an all-time high, as well as public sentiment, which can drive any piece of legislation, even through the reluctance of Mitch McConnell, to get adopted.
And what he said actually was that he doesn't see the need to do this as one whole thing. We've heard this with the wall, right? Let's sit down and talk about all elements of immigration reform, which both sides agree should have happened a long time ago, and yet we still don't see ourselves getting to really any substantive change, both party-wise, president on board. So how do we get out of this rut we're on in terms of immigration reform? Is it good to carve off Dreamer Act and Promise Act as one thing, or should we be looking at a holistic approach to immigration reform?
Well, I believe passing the Promise and DREAM Act together are an important piece of legislation that was adopted by the House of Representatives. The Congress should be taking on comprehensive immigration reform And truly, if Leader Mitch McConnell's approach is that we should be working in a broader way in the Congress, then he has a path forward. It wasn't too long ago that the U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan, comprehensive immigration package to address the broken immigration system in America, but it was former Speaker Boehner and former Speaker Ryan that refused to allow a vote on the House floor. I believe that if we had that same package that was adopted in the Senate, presented in the floor, I know that we would get a vote, and it probably would pass with more than 250, maybe even 300 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. So again, if Leader McConnell is sincere in his approach, there's a path, get it done, let's work together and get the president on board, and let's get this signed into law.
I'm curious, and I'm sure viewers would be too, with your position in leadership, with Nancy Pelosi and your team, how often are there conversations, meetings with the leadership in the Senate to try to work out these differences? How does that play out behind the scenes that we don't see?
Well, Speaker Pelosi is constantly reaching out to not just the administration as they are to her, as well as working with the U.S. Senate. I think that many of us have been disappointed that Mitch McConnell, when he deemed himself the grim reaper of legislation being passed out of the House, it showed his reluctance, if not outright refusal to pass legislation, and really showing the obstructionist view that he's taken on when it comes to passing meaningful legislation for the people across America. But Speaker Pelosi, privately and publicly, has reached out, whether it's infrastructure legislation, not just with the administration, but with the Senate leadership, as well as lowering prescription drug prices and healthcare costs for the people across America. 3 bipartisan issues, but again, that Mitch McConnell refuses to work on or to take up. The American people are demanding action, and I think everyone that refuses to take action on these issues, they're going to be held accountable come November of 2020.
Are they, not just on immigration, but in general, we know where the approval ratings are for members of Congress like yourself. It seems like we're as divided as ever. Are there signs you're seeing, any hope that you can give us as the voters in terms of this ability in Washington to get things done?
Well, let me take you back a couple of years when Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. I was honored that 10 bills that I authored to address the opioid crisis that we're facing in New Mexico and across America were part of the final package and were signed into law that I believe will begin to make a difference, a positive difference here in New Mexico. It doesn't end our work. We still have more work to do, but that's one example of how we are able to work together. I'm the co-chair of the National Lab Caucus and the Cleanup Caucus and Tech Transfer Caucus. Democrats and Republicans coming together to take on those important responsibilities that we have in that space as well. So we do work together, we come together, and again, I believe that there is nothing that is not bipartisan about an infrastructure package, lowering prescription drug prices and lowering healthcare costs in America, and I'm certainly hopeful that Mitch McConnell will take those pieces of legislation up.
Let's stay on the healthcare topic for a minute here. You were on record this week as supporting Medicare for all as a potential path forward for us. Why do you think that's the best approach for us to be taking?
So there are several initiatives that I've been working on as it pertains to making sure that everyone across America and everyone across New Mexico will have access to quality care no matter what their zip code is or how much money they make. I believe healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Not all of my colleagues agree with that, which is where some of these divisions occur. Senator Sanders and Pramila Jayapal are the lead authors and sponsors of the Medicare for All, a single-payer system that will provide expanded coverage for people across America, and one that will now preserve the VA and IHS. Previous versions of that legislation actually eliminated the VA and eliminate IHS. There's not a veteran that I've spoken to yet that wants to see the VA eliminated, or in the case of the Trump administration, privatized, which they constantly threat. And so I worked closely with Pramila Jayapal. One of my colleagues out of Washington State was a co-chair of the Progressive Caucus on the IHS provisions as well. And Pramila was willing to allow us to author those provisions, make sure that they were included so we could protect IHS, strengthen it, as well as ensure that the VA would not be eliminated. So I believe that that's one piece of legislation that provides a path forward to expanded coverage. I'm also the lead author of a Medicaid public option buy-in with Senator Schatz out of Hawaii, a piece of legislation that was considered in New Mexico this year. It passed the House, but sadly did not receive the votes necessary in the Senate to pass. I also believe that that's an approach that protects essential health benefits, that provides expanded coverage for people across New Mexico and across America. Medicaid exists in all 50 states and as well as all of the territories. And we've seen some of the work that Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has done now to strengthen the Medicaid program in New Mexico with the support of the legislature. And we're also working on legislation in the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I sit on, to shore up and protect the Affordable Care Act. We're facing all the sabotage coming out of the Trump administration, as well as attempts by our Republican colleagues to completely eliminate the Affordable Care Act to take protections away from people with pre-existing conditions. So again, we have many ideas, many ways to provide the most affordable and comprehensive care in America, where our Republican colleagues just seem committed to repealing the Affordable Care Act and taking protections away from people with pre-existing conditions. So again, I'm proud to be a co-sponsor, not just of Medicare for All, the lead author of Medicaid Public Option Buy-in, and also doing everything I can to shore up and protect the Affordable Care Act.
I want to talk about some of your environmental efforts as well. You've had some good luck recently with the Thermo Fisher, which I believe they made electronic parts and didn't really clean up very well. But talk about what you were able to do in that situation from Washington.
Well, truly a credit to the work of the investigative news reporting coming from the Santa Fe Reporter. It was during one of my sit-downs with the editorial leadership there that issue came up, and we followed up because there were no answers being provided. The former administration in New Mexico under Governor Martinez and Lieutenant Governor Sanchez were refusing to provide responses with when the cleanup would take place, the magnitude of what the contamination was as well. And this is in a community where people live in Santa Fe. So we kept pushing to get answers, and we're finally at a place where the federal government is responding under the new leadership in the state of New Mexico with Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. We're getting answers, and so we're going to provide all the clarity that we can to get to the bottom of this and make sure that place is cleaned up. It's one instance where you can work together in a community to get answers, and especially push back against those that refuse to provide answers or continue to stonewall or even obstruct or cover up. I mean, I think that's a little bit of what we've been even seeing with this administration, and this is another example of it. So
whose responsibility with cleanups like that should it be? Federal government, the state, or maybe the better question is who should take the lead on those?
Well, so there should have been provisions in place so that whoever the owners were, that company that was in there that was doing this work, they should have been required to clean this up as well. But there are clear federal laws that were broken here, and so the federal government needs to step forward to provide support in this place. And again, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham's team has taken on cleanup as a big responsibility and is showing that the state's willing to be a participant and a partner to make sure that cleanup will take place. But look, in this case, I think it's another example where the federal government needs to step forward with this contaminant, or as we've talked about, what's happening with PFAS across New Mexico and across America, especially out in around Cannon Air Force Base and down and around Holloman Air Force Base.
And just to remind people about that, we followed that here. Laura Paskus works with us a lot. She's been following it, and in large part because of letters like you wrote and Senator Udall wrote asking about what was going on with this. And this is largely contaminants from fire retardants used on Air Force bases. It's not just a New Mexico problem, but it seems to be a problem getting information to start with to then figure out what to do next. So talk about what you're doing ongoing to make sure that stonewalling doesn't happen, that we get these answers we need to come up with a plan here for those two places.
Well, again, while our attention in New Mexico has been in and around Cannon Air Force Base as well as Holloman Air Force Base, I'm proud to be working with Democrats and Republicans in the Congress where we put together a bipartisan working group. There have been several pieces of legislation that have been authored. There have been hearings that have been scheduled. We're looking to get inclusion of language that will require the Department of Defense and the Air Force to clean up military bases across the country like Cannon and Holloman as well in the National Defense Authorization Act. But every committee of jurisdiction is going to hold oversight hearings on this contaminant because, again, it's widespread across the country. And when you have another contaminant that people can be drinking every day, and we see the Trump administration's response, well, let's lower the protocol of what exposure and contaminant may be with the clean water standards. That's not the right approach. This is going to kill people. It's going to cause cancer. It's contaminating communities. It needs to be cleaned up, and the federal government has a responsibility to do its part.
Running out of time, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the other big thing that I'm sure you get all the time, But I'm just curious where you are right now on impeachment. Is that something you support in terms of President Donald Trump and the findings from the Mueller report, or do you think efforts are spent better elsewhere, as House Speaker Pelosi has mentioned?
I've been working closely with Speaker Pelosi as well as the chairs of the committees of jurisdiction in ensuring that we are carrying out our constitutional oversight responsibilities to these investigations. We have many concerns, not just that were laid out in the Mueller report, where there were many findings that show what seems to be obstruction, clear obstruction, and what's not obstruction about the President of the United States saying out in public, on the news, that he will not comply with any subpoenas or any answers to questions that Congress is asking. But what I think is important here is that we get to the bottom of all of the questions that need to be asked and present the facts to the American people. This next week in Congress, there will be action in the Judiciary Committee where there will be a hearing with former prosecutors. We will be taking a vote on Tuesday to hold Attorney General Barr and General Counsel personal for the President McGahn in contempt, as well as provide language for strengthened subpoena authorities to the chairs of jurisdiction overseeing these investigations. On Wednesday, the Intelligence Committee under Chairman Adam Schiff will also be holding hearings on the Mueller report, and that's just this week. That's coming off of a few court decisions that favored us, if you will, in the legislative branch of government, ensuring that we can get to the bottom of this, ask questions that clearly saw that we have co-equal branch of government with the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch to make sure that we're able to get answers from the American people. But again, we need to make sure that we're presenting the facts to the country and that we're working to do that in the Congress. And that's why we're stepping forward with this increased investigative authority that you'll see action taken on Tuesday of this week.
But you yourself, impeachment now, or wait for some of these things to play out? Where are you on impeachment?
I'm with the Speaker on this. I think that we need to be thoughtful and use every tool that we have at our disposal. As I've clearly said, everything is on the table, but it's important that we continue to bring people together. And as long as we're getting answers and responses and we're continuing to unfold and unravel what we're seeing coming out of this administration, that's a path that I think is positive. But again, many of my colleagues have been very clear about their approaches as well, including about half the members on the Judiciary Committee. So we're going to continue to work together. What I can tell you is the Democratic caucus is united around the fact that we believe no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States, and that we are all concerned about the obstruction, about the cover-up, and the unwillingness to cooperate with the co-equal branch of government in answering subpoenas and providing answers to questions that we're asking. And we will hold this president accountable.
Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, time always goes too fast, but we appreciate you taking some of it with us this weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.